Hello and welcome to Learn Finnish with me. Today I want to talk about why Finnish feels so difficult to learn. I'm a Finnish teacher and I have seen so many people struggling with Finnish, and today I will explain the main reasons that people are struggling with, and also I will give you examples why Finnish might not be as hard as you think. I will also share a language learning memory from my childhood, which is related to this topic. Why learners struggle and why Finnish actually makes sense after all. Is Finnish really one of the hardest languages in the world? I actually talked about this topic a bit in another video when I was talking about how long it takes to learn Finnish. In case you want to check it out, I will leave it up there. But as a short answer, I don't think Finnish is the hardest language to learn, at least for most people. But it definitely won't be the easiest either. It will be most likely for you the hardest language that you have learned so far, or at least among the hardest languages. What's the reason for this? The core reason is that Finnish is not related to most European languages. If you are watching this video, most likely you are speaking English fluently, either as your mother tongue or as a second language, or at least you have a good understanding of the English language. And English is a European language, and many other European languages resemble English in many ways. Many European languages share a lot of common vocabulary and structures among themselves. However, Finnish comes from a completely different language family, and this means that there are many structural differences and also vocabulary differences. I also want to explain very quickly what the language family means. In case you have never studied linguistics or you are not familiar with this term, this is a quick way to explain it. Here we have a big Indo-European language tree, which includes many big word languages like English and Spanish, Russian, Bengali, and so on. It has two main branches: Indo-Iranian, that includes, for example, Bengali, Marathi, and many languages spoken in India and in Asia. Then the other language branch includes European languages, for example, Spanish, English, Italian, and Russian. And you can see that it has many other smaller branches. The size of the branch expresses how big the language group is, and also more or less how many speakers belong to that group. And also, as you can see, English is the biggest one because it's the most spoken language in the world. In the European branch, we have Germanic languages, Italic or Romance languages, Slavic languages, and then a few other smaller branches like Albanian and Celtic that are not related to these other big branches, but they still form part of the European language tree. And you can see that, for example, English and German are relatively close to each other. They belong to this big Germanic branch. And although there are some other small languages that are actually more similar to German than English, for example, Bavarian or Yiddish, we could say that German and English are actually very close to each other and very similar languages, linguistically speaking. Well, where is Finnish here? It's nowhere in the Indo-European language tree at all, in this whole tree that includes some of the most spoken languages in the world. Well, Finnish is below here on the right. It has its own small little tree. Finnish belongs to Uralic languages. There are two language branches in the Uralic languages. Finnic languages, including Finnish, and Estonian and Sami languages, for instance. And then Ugric language branch, which includes Hungarian and a few other very small languages. I hope that these language trees give you a better understanding on how far linguistically we are when we are learning Finnish compared to most likely most other languages that you are familiar with. Reason number 1 why many people are struggling when learning Finnish is that there's very little familiar vocabulary to them. In many languages, you can guess words or learn them easily after the first time you hear them, or although not all words, at least some common vocabulary is somewhat transferable from your mother tongue or from other language that you already know to another language that you are learning. But in Finnish, guessing is much harder, and it's normal that you can guess only very little before reaching intermediate level. The reason for this is that when you're starting your Finnish learning, all the vocabulary, or almost all the vocabulary, looks like nothing you've seen before. Of course, there are some loan words from English or from Swedish or even from Greek or Latin, but they are very few compared to most other languages spoken in Europe. Let's do some vocabulary comparison. Here we have first an English word, sun. In German, we say Sonne. In Spanish, sol. And in Italian, sole. In French, soleil. And in Russian, although it's written with Cyrillic, if you can read the Cyrillic alphabet, it's relatively easy to pronounce, solnce. And you can see and hear that although all of these words are different, they are quite similar. And maybe after hearing them once, or at least twice, you can already recognize the word and be able to even say and write it. However, in Finnish we say aurinko. Aurinko. Completely different. It doesn't even share most of the letters that the other words have. The very different vocabulary is the reason why people need to spend a lot of time on studying vocabulary and practicing new words, especially in the beginning of their studies. Other example, problem. In German, Problem. In Spanish, problema. In French, problème. In Italian, problema. In Russian, problema. And in Finnish, ongelma. Family. Familie. Familia. Famille. Familia. Semja. And in Russian now, it's quite different. But in Russian, they have another word, familia, which actually means surname. And it's also related to the word family. In Finnish, we say perhe. It looks nothing like these other words. And surname is sukunimi, so no relation there either. University. Universitet. Universidad. University. Universita. Universitet. Yliopisto. Telephone. Telefon. Telefono. Telefon. Telefono. Telefon. Puhelin. Actually, puhelin is related to the word puhe. Puhe means speech, and many gadgets end with in. Restaurant. Restaurant. Restaurante. Restaurant. Ristorante. Restaurant. Ravintola. Here you can see that ravintola kind of looks similar. It at least starts with the same letter, and it has pretty much the same length as these other words. So maybe you are able to guess what ravintola means, but still it's more different than any of the other words here. Well, enough of comparison. Let's move on to reason number 2. Finnish has many grammatical cases, and this is something that many learners are especially struggling with. Instead of prepositions, Finnish changes the ending of the word. So we basically don't have nearly any prepositions. Instead, the basic form for house is talo. But if you want to say in the house, you say talossa. From the house, talosta. Into the house, taloon. And if you mix up talossa and talosta, then Finns don't understand you or might misunderstand you. Why do cases feel so confusing? Although many learners learn early on the basic idea of different grammatical cases, there are 15 of them in total, both in singular and in plural. And 12 of them are actively used in everyday language. 3 of them are quite rare. And there are 9 cases that you must be able to understand and form to be able to communicate even at a beginner level, and to be able to form like very common normal sentences like I go to a store, or I am in a park, or I'm meeting a friend. You cannot form any of these sentences in Finnish unless you understand the basics of these cases. And although some of the endings look very similar, each of them has a specific meaning. People also struggle between which case they should use out of all of these. Reason number 3, why Finnish is so difficult. Words can become very long. Finnish has a lot of compound words. For example, winter coat would be talvitakki. It consists of 2 different words, talvi, winter, and takki, coat. In general, in Finnish, if there's one concept, which is like a fixed concept, let's say winter coat, then we write those words together. As we already discussed, Finnish also has a lot of grammatical cases that we add at the end of the word, and this also makes the word a lot longer. For example, talvitakissa means in a winter coat. Finnish also has possessive suffixes. For example, talvitakissani means in my winter coat. And clitics. For example, talvitakissanikin, also in my winter coat. Now, even if you know the word takki, coat, but you see talvitakissanikin, you might not even realize that there's a word takki in it, unless you understand these other features of word formation. Reason number 4, vowel harmony. In Finnish, we have both a and ä, and o and ö, and u and y vowels. Sometimes the pronunciation between these ones with the dots also cause some issues for some learners, but it's not so difficult after all once when you get the gist of it. However, people sometimes struggle a lot in writing when they have to add different suffixes to words, and they have to remember to use the dots, or they have to choose between a and ä. There are certain rules that you must know to be able to use these vowels and suffixes correctly in Finnish. Those rules are called vowel harmony or vokaaliharmonia in Finnish. In case you are interested in learning more about this, I explain this in detail in my Finnish beginner course. You can find more information about that in the link in my bio. I also have many other courses for other levels. I have courses for complete beginners, advanced beginners, intermediate students, and also advanced students. These courses help you to learn in a structured way, and they navigate you through these difficult Finnish concepts. You will learn gradually and you won't feel lost anymore. The reason number 5 why Finnish is difficult to learn. Verb types and verb changes. Finnish verbs change depending on the subject and time tense. Here's an example. Minä puhun, I speak. Sinä puhut, you speak. Hän puhuu, he or she speaks. Me puhumme, we speak. Te puhutte, you speak. And he puhuvat, they speak. All of these personal pronouns have a different verb form, and you simply have to learn these and the structures to be able to form any sentences in Finnish. The difficult part, however, is that not all the verbs are conjugated the same way. For example, in Spanish, there are only 3 verbal groups plus irregular verbs. In Finnish, we have 6 verbal groups and a few irregular verbs. But we don't have almost any irregular verbs. And that's actually a factor that makes learning Finnish easier. And that's actually a factor that helps when you're learning Finnish. Oh, and not only that, but of course we have also past tense forms for all of these groups. Reason number 6, the partitive case. Oh, the partitive case. I have never yet met a student who would have not been confused by partitive. Partitive can express so many things in Finnish, and it's a concept that doesn't exist in many other languages at all. In English, there's nothing like partitive. Some of the same meanings that we express with partitive are simply expressed in other ways. For example, with the verb form. Look at this example. Luen kirjan can mean either I read a book or I'll read a book. But if I say luen kirjaa, I'm reading a book, it means that I'm reading it at the moment. Sometimes partitive can express continuous actions, something that you are doing right now. But this is only one of the many meanings of partitive. If you're interested in learning more, I explain this in my Finnish courses. Reason number 7, flexible word order. English usually follows a strict order. For example, Kaija is sitting next to Miko. Here we have Kaija as the subject, which comes first, and we cannot say Miko is sitting next to Kaija because that would change the whole meaning of the sentence. However, in Finnish, we can say Kaija istuu Mikon vieressä or Mikon vieressä istuu Kaija. Both of these sentences mean exactly the same thing as the English sentence, but you can see that we have 2 different word orders. Why? The many cases that the Finnish language has allow very flexible word order because you can tell by looking at the form of the word which part of the sentence it is. I mean, what function of this sentence it has. If we have Kaija in nominative, it's the subject, and Mikon is in genitive, so it cannot be the subject. Reason number 8, consonant gradation. There are certain consonants that change inside the word. Not always, but sometimes. And that also makes the thing a bit tricky. But here are some common changes. K often disappears. If we have a double K inside the word, it often becomes 1K. And if we have P, it becomes V. If the word has T, it becomes D. And there are more of these. Consonant gradation is something that you normally learn pretty much in the beginning of your Finnish studies, if you are attending a course or if you are studying with a teacher. However, I've seen that there are still people who, even at intermediate level, are still struggling with this. Because, it can be that complex. Reason number 9. There can be also some other changes in the word stem. And these changes are often just called word types or sanatyypit in Finnish. Understanding the so-called word types is helpful because they reduce memorization. Once you have memorized the word type rules, you can apply those rules to many other words that are even new to you, that you don't know beforehand. Because by looking at the form of the word, you can already place them into a category. And then based on that category, you can decline the words. I mean, you can add the different grammatical cases. You can say, for example, in a building, in a meeting, etc. Reason number 10. If learning all of those previous rules wasn't enough for you, Finnish also has puhekieli, so-called spoken Finnish, which is very different from the way we write. Here you have an example. In written Finnish, we say or we write minä menen kauppaan. And in spoken Finnish, we say often mä meen kauppaan. Mä meen kauppaan. Both of these forms are correct, but they are used in a different register. When we are writing, we have to use the correct written Finnish. For example, when you're writing emails, when you're taking an exam, when you're reading a newspaper, you're reading a book, you will need kirjakieli. But when you're talking with people, they don't normally speak the same way as, well, what you would see in a book or in the newspaper. They use puhekieli. And puhekieli is a whole new world because it can be regional, it can have different variations depending on the speaker. I don't normally recommend starting with puhekieli too early on if you are a beginner, because it can be way too confusing. It can be useful to know some of the very basics of spoken Finnish in the beginning too, but getting more into puhekieli is something I recommend only after you have learned the basics of Finnish, like until I would say A2. After that, it makes sense to learn more spoken Finnish variations. I actually have a separate course about puhekieli where I go through many common structures of puhekieli that help you to understand it better, and also puhekieli vocabulary, and of course practical examples. You can find more information in the link in the bio. Reason number 11. Need for grammar term control. I'm sorry to say it, I know that many people hated grammar at school, but when you are learning Finnish, you have to become in terms with grammar. And you also have to become in terms with the common and basic grammar terminology and words that we use when we refer to different grammar phenomena. Otherwise, it's really complicated to teach Finnish and to learn Finnish, because if you cannot tell, for example, a subject from an object, you will be completely lost when you are learning Finnish, because you will not understand the difference of many patterns. And moreover, in Finnish, we never use the same word for the verb and for the noun. For example, in English, you can say drink, but in Finnish, we have two words. We have juoda, which is the verb, and we have juoma, which is the drink as a noun. And the last reason number 12, why learning Finnish can feel so difficult, is learning speed. This is actually related to all of the other previous factors that I just explained. Finnish often feels slow at the beginning because learners must understand lots of new concepts they are not used to. But later on, the language becomes more predictable. You already know a lot of vocabulary. You can guess new words more easily. You have basic understanding of the grammar. Many of the more advanced grammar are adjustments, other ways how to use the same grammar that you have already learned, but let's say in a more creative way. And having very good basis of vocabulary and grammar in Finnish will take you far. But if you have a lot of gaps in the basic knowledge, you will be stumbling over and over again in your learning. Learning Finnish is kind of like a pyramid. You have a lot of information in the at the bottom, and then when you're climbing higher up, then it becomes gradually easier. I know that learning Finnish might feel like a nightmare sometimes, but learning foreign languages for Finns can be also sometimes difficult, and we have been there. We just started often a lot earlier. In Finland, we start learning English normally as the first foreign language around 7 years old. Many people don't know this, but for me, learning English was actually really hard for the first few years. I didn't even see the point of it when I was a kid in the beginning. I didn't understand why we have to write things one way and say them the other way. And I think I was either 8 or 9 years old, and it was maybe like my second year studying English. And I can still remember this precise example and why it confused me so much. I'm gonna share it with you. Dad's salad. Sounds super simple, right? It means, of course, that the salad is dad's. But my little Finnish brain had earlier learned that we can say, for example, he's nice. So does that salad mean that is the salad or that is salad? What? And I had also learned that sometimes this additional s can mean that someone has something or that someone has done something. We can say he's eaten the salad. So can that salad mean dad has the salad? Of course, in the hindsight, it looks very obvious. Of course, it must mean only the first option, and the other two are completely unthinkable. And moreover, well, dad's salad doesn't have any article either. But remember, Finnish doesn't have articles. Maybe my little brain forgot it and was very confused by this sentence and thinking like, well, why can this same structure mean so many different things? Like how would I know, right? In Finnish, we have very clearly three different structures for all of these. We can say isän salaatti, which would be dad's salad. If I want to say dad is salad, it is isä on salaatti. If I want to say dad has a salad, it's isällä on salaatti. So yes, learning foreign languages can be very difficult. Little did I know that one day I would be actually using English fluently and teaching my language and the difficulties of it for other people. So, summing up, Finnish may look complex at first, but it follows clear patterns. Once learners start recognizing these patterns, the language becomes much easier to understand. And last but not least, what makes learning Finnish easy? Finnish has a very logical structure. It's structure focused. I think I said this already earlier, but it's good to mention it once more. Also, pronunciation is very consistent. If you compare it to English, for instance, English pronunciation is a mess. And this is something I struggled so much when I was learning English. Thankfully, listening to English music helped a lot. But English has words like through, though, thought, and tough that are all pronounced completely different, although they look relatively similar in writing. We do not have this problem in Finnish. Finnish doesn't have a grammatical gender either, and no articles, and no future tense. So you can eliminate those problems right in the beginning. What do you think is the hardest thing in learning Finnish? Would you add something to my list? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Remember to give the video a like if you learned something new and subscribe to the channel for more learning tips and Finnish lessons. See you! Bye!